The Curse of the Demon Dog Bridge. The Call of the Dead. Based on real stories. The sharp wind blew through the gnarled trees of Dumbarton, whispering forgotten secrets among the dead leaves that covered the damp ground. Jack Collins drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel as he drove down the winding road toward the small Scottish town. He and his team of amateur documentary filmmakers were looking for a new story for the channel, but this one felt different, more intense, more alive. Beside him, Emily reviewed the files on Overtoun Bridge. The place was famous not only for its imposing architecture, but for the inexplicable it seemed that defied all logic. For more than half a century, offerings of dogs were leapt from the bridge to their deaths, as if drawn by an invisible force. The most disturbing detail? Those who survived tried to jump again. That doesn't make sense, Emily muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. Dogs don't commit suicide. Maybe it's not a choice, Sam replied from the back seat. He closed the laptop where there were testimonies from local residents. Everyone talks about a presence on the bridge, something that could not be seen, but that could be felt. The GPS announced that they were just a few minutes away from their destination. The silence in the car grew heavier, filled with invisible tension. Lisa, the fourth member of the team, who until then had been engrossed in her cell phone, finally spoke. Did you know they say that humans are also affected by this thing? Your voice is so hesitant. The bridge doesn't just call to dogs. Jack felt an involuntary shiver run up his spine. He was not an easily impressionable man, but there was something unsettling about this case. Something that seemed to pull him, as if he already knew his name. They finally reached the center of Dumbarton. The city was small, with narrow streets and old buildings that had been forgotten by time. As they parked, they noticed some residents watching the windows. No greeting, no smile, just silent, suspicious looks. When Jack got out of the car, an elderly man leaning on a walking stick moved slowly. His eyes were small and sunken, as if they carried the weight of a lifetime of secrets. Without warning, he grabbed Jack's arm with surprisingly strong fingers and whispered, "The bridge doesn't just choose dogs." Jack froze. The elderly man stared at him for another second, then turned and disappeared into the fog that began to creep across the city. The documentary hadn't even started, and Jack already felt that they were being expected. The car advanced along the winding road that led to the town of Dumbarton, cutting through the misty landscape of Scotland. The gray sky and the cold wind created a melancholy scene, as if the earth itself wanted to drive them away. Jack kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, but his mind was restless. Ever since we researched Overtoun Bridge, he's felt a strange weight in his chest, as if something was pulling him to that place. Lisa, sitting in the passenger seat, was reading aloud an article about the bridge. Since the 1950s, numerous dogs have inexplicably jumped to their deaths on the Overtoun Bridge. Most were collie breeds or had long snouts. The specifications were never fully explained. Emily, in the back seat, frowned. Okay, but why only dogs? This doesn't make sense. Maybe it's the smell of the visions that live in the river, Sam suggested, adjusting his headphones. Some scientists believe that dogs are attracted to odor and jump out of instinct. Lisa snorted. So explain this to me, the dogs that survived. When they fall, they return to the bridge and jump again. Silence was installed in the car. Jack exchanged a look with Emily in the rearview mirror. There was no logical explanation for that. When we finally entered the city, we immediately felt the change in the atmosphere. The streets were too empty. Some people walked hurriedly, but when they noticed the stranger's car, they looked away or simply disappeared into their homes. Jack parked near a small market and got out to ask for directions. The bell above the door tinkled as he entered. Behind the counter, an elderly woman inspired him with narrowed and suspicious eyes. "Good morning," Jack said, trying to sound friendly. "My friends and I are making a documentary about the Overtoun Bridge." The woman's expression instantly resisted. "There's nothing interesting there," she said dryly. Jack frowned. "But it's one of the most mysterious places in Scotland. "Too much mystery is never good for anyone," said the woman. "Leave that bridge alone." The door to the market opened suddenly and an elderly man entered. His presence silenced the environment. He was thin, with a gray beard and a look that seemed to see more than you should. He stared at Jack for a long moment before saying in a low, hoarse voice, "The bridge doesn't just choose dogs." Jack felt a shiver run up his spine. "Like this?" The man looked at him deeply, as if trying to decide whether or not he should tell him more. Then he moved slowly and whispered, "If they're already here, then it's already too late." Jack swallowed second. Outside, a mist began to creep across the city, as if it were waiting for them. The narrow road leading to Overtoun Bridge seemed to stretch beyond time, surrounded by ancient gnarled trees. The gray sky hung heavy over them, and fog crawled like spectral fingers across the damp asphalt. Jack drove in silence, his thoughts echoing the old man's warning in the market. The bridge doesn't just choose dogs. When he finally arrived at the location, the scene was both magnificent and oppressive. The stone bridge rises over the valley like a forgotten monument, its structures covered in moss and damp. The wind seemed stronger there, whistling through the cracks in the rocks like suggestions carried by time. Lisa adjusted her camera and stepped forward. "Well, here we are. The famous Overtoun Bridge." She forced a smile, but her voice shook slightly. Emily looked around uneasily. "There's something strange here. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't like this place." Jack felt the same way. It was as if the bridge was alive, watching them. It was then that an unexpected sound broke the silence, the brass of a dog. The group turned and saw an elderly man approaching along the trail, holding a loose leash. A golden-haired collie trotted ahead of him, abandoning its tail and sniffing the ground with interest. "He shouldn't be loose," Lisa muttered. The dog, however, seemed fascinated by the bridge railing. He stopped abruptly, apparently his ears, and stared into the void, as if he had seen something that no one else could see. "Hey, friend," called the owner, but his voice was shaking. He knew. He had seen this before. The dog took a step forward. Jack felt a knot in his stomach. "No." Without hesitation, the collie ran and jumped from the parapet. The owner's scream echoed across the bridge. Lisa dropped the camera on the floor. Emily covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with horror. Jack ran to the edge and looked down. The fog was thick, but he could see the dog's body, lying inert among the rocks. The owner fell to his knees, eyes glassy, repeating the same words quietly, like a mantra. He was called. Jack backed away from the edge, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at his friends who were equally terrified. The bridge, it wasn't just a legend. She was alive, and he was already calling for more. Silence hung over the bridge like a forgotten corpse. The dog's owner was still kneeling on the ground, eyes blank, muttering softly. None of the team members dared to say anything. They knew they had witnessed something beyond comprehension. Jack picked up his camera from the floor and turned off the recording. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as if trying to catch his breath. "We need to get out of here," Emily muttered. Lisa received it immediately, but Jack hesitated. He felt something strange, something that went beyond fear. The bridge wanted them to stay. Back at the hotel, no one talked about what happened. Dinner was silent, and Sam spent most of the time doing nothing, as if he was still absorbing the day's events. Jack, however, couldn't forget the feeling of being watched. He reviewed the footage on his laptop, trying to focus on what he had recorded before the dog jumped. At first, the video seemed normal. Shaky images of the bridge, Lisa narrating some facts, the strong wind shaking the twisted branches. But when he slowly advanced the recording, something slowly ran down your spine. A shadow was in the fog. It wasn't a blur or an effect of the light. It was something there, a motionless silhouette, almost human, but very thin, very tall. It had no face. Jack paused the video, eyes fixed on the screen. He rewinded the recording, then fast-forwarded it. The shadow doesn't move. dude, are you selling this?" Lisa said, looking over his shoulder. Jack barely managed to respond. His chest felt tight. It was then that he heard the first message. Low, distant, like a cold draft passing through a narrow hallway. Jack jerked his head back. The room was empty. Lisa was still by her side, but she didn't seem to have heard anything. The sound came again, this time closer. "Jack," he froze. His breath stopped in his chest. The voice whispered his name. Inside the room. Jack suddenly declared himself, knocking over the chair. Lisa jumped back. "What the hell was that?" she exclaimed. Jack looked around, feeling cold sweat run down the back of his neck. But there was no one there. He looked at the camera again. In the video, the silhouette in the fog was still there. But now, she was closer. The silence in Jack's room was still thick when Lisa turned off the camera and closed the laptop abruptly. "You're kidding me, right?" she murmured, trying to hide the fear in her voice. Jack rubbed his face with his hands. The sound still seemed to resonate inside his head, but he didn't want to admit it. If he said it out loud, it would become real. But something inside him already knew. It was real. The next morning, Jack, Lisa, and Sam decided to return to the city to find more information. Emily, shaken by the events of the previous night, preferred to stay at the hotel. This time, they went straight to the municipal library. The place was small and stuffy, with old shelves and a strong smell of old paper. An elderly librarian greeted them with a suspicious look, as if commenting on the reason for the visit before they even spoke. "We want to know more about Overtoun Bridge," Jack said, straight to the point. The woman was silent for a moment. Then, without saying a word, he cried out and disappeared between the shelves. When he returned, he brought with him a bunch of newspapers yellowed with age and piled them in front of them. "You shouldn't be asking questions about this place," she said in an almost maternal tone. "The bridge has already taken too many people." Lisa opened one of the old newspapers and her face paled. The 1994 headline read, "Man throws his son from the top of the bridge, saying the devil said it." Jack felt his stomach turn. He turned another page and found an even older article, from 1959. "Young man is found dead on Overtoun Bridge. Police registration is suicide, but residents report something wrong at the scene." Lisa continued leafing through the newspapers, her brow furrowed. These are not just isolated cases. There are decades of people dying in this place." Jack took a deep breath. Something about this pattern bothered him. "Who built this bridge?" he said to the librarian. The woman sighed. "It was part of Lady Overtoun's estate in the 19th century." Jack exchanged a look with Lisa. He had already read the name before. "What do you know about her?" The librarian looked around as if afraid of being overheard. Then he lowered his voice. "Lady Overtoun lived in that mansion until her death at the beginning of the 20th century. After her husband died, she became obsessed with the idea of life after death. I spent hours on the bridge alone, muttering things." Lisa frowned. "What kind of things?" A hesitant woman. "Some said she tried to talk to her husband. Others think she spoke to something more." Jack felt a shiver run up his spine. "Do you believe that?" The librarian looked at him. "I believe that she never left." The weight of that sentence fell on the three of them like a death sentence. Jack knew he was getting into something much bigger than he could understand. And the bridge knew they were all there, waiting. The weight of the revelations in the library still hung over the group when they returned to the hotel. The air inside the small room felt thick, stuffy, as if something invisible was there, listening to every word they said. Jack dropped the old newspapers on the bed and ran his hands over his face. "This is not coincidental. It can't be." Lisa crossed her arms, uneasy. What if Lady Overtoun wasn't trying to talk to her husband? What if it was something worse? Sam, who had been silent since leaving the library, suddenly spoke. "I think I can prove it was." Jack and Lisa turned to him in confusion. Sam opened his backpack and pulled out a thick leather-bound book. The edges of the pages were yellowed, and the musty smell indicated that the book was very old. "Where did you get that?" Lisa said, suspicious. Sam gave a half smile. "Let's just say the librarian didn't take a good look at what I was carrying." Jack opened the book. The pages were written by hand, with irregular, almost feverish handwriting. The secrets of darkness cannot remain closed forever. Blood must be offered, and he who watches between the veils will answer the call. Lisa took a step back. "What the hell is that?" Sam turned a few more pages. Here it talks about ancient rituals performed in this region. Before the bridge even existed, before Christians arrived here, this place was used for sacrifices. Jack felt a knot in his stomach. Sacrifices of what? Sam spoke the look slowly. People. A heavy silence took over the room. "This can't be real," Lisa murmured. Jack took a deep breath and read continuously. The book talked about a portal, an energy vein on Earth that could be opened with human blood. According to the writings, the Druids of the time believed that something waited on the other side, something that could only manifest itself in our world through continuous sacrifices. Jack turned the page and froze. In the middle of the hand-drawn text, there was an illustration. A Ponte Overtoun. Lisa turned pale. That doesn't make sense. The bridge didn't exist at that time. Sam turned another page and added a more recent note, written in shaky handwriting. The construction of the bridge was not an accident. The architects knew. They erected the structure over the site of the old altar, sealing what was below. But seals did not last forever. The blood reopens the path, and the path has already begun to open. Jack pulled himself away from the book as if it burned his hands. Lisa covered her mouth with a shaking hand. Sam closed his eyes and sighed. Someone wanted to open a passage. Jack felt dread settle in his chest. He didn't know how, but I was sure that this passage was already open, and they were in exactly the wrong place at the wrong time. Night came like a black veil over Dumbarton, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep into the bones. Despite everything I discovered, Jack knew I needed to keep going. If they ran away now, they would never understand what was happening on that bridge. It was Lisa's idea to make a live broadcast to the channel. "People need to see this in real time," she said, adjusting the camera on the tripod. "Maybe someone can understand something that we didn't see." Jack didn't like the idea, but he knew that trying to capture evidence might be the only way to prove that they weren't crazy. They arrived at the bridge shortly after midnight. The place was different, darker, more oppressive. The wind whispered through the rocks and the mist crept across the ground, wrapping around her legs like a silent predator. Lisa activated the transmission. "We're live directly from the Overtoun Bridge," she began, trying to rise professionally, but her voice wavered slightly. "This is the place known for strange cases of dogs jumping without explanation. But, as discovered, perhaps this bridge has much darker secrets." The comments even exploded on Jack's cell phone screen. "Dark truths. I get goosebumps just looking at this place. Horror fanatic. The mist looks weird. Is there something in it? User 6666. Look behind you." Jack felt a chill when he read that last comment. He turned his cell phone camera and focused on the fog behind them. Nothing. Lisa continues walking along the bridge railing, talking about Lady Overtoun's accounts and paid rituals. That's when it happened. Lisa was pushed. Without warning, his body was thrown back with an invisible force. His camera fell to the ground, spinning, and captured the exact moment Lisa staggered dangerously to the edge of the bridge. Jack ran to her. "Lisa!" She balanced herself at the last second as her hands gripped the edge of the railing, but when Jack grabbed her shoulders to pull her back, something was wrong. Lisa didn't seem like herself anymore. His eyes were wide, but there was no fear of them. Just a deep emptiness, as if something inside her had disappeared. His face contorted into a weak smile and wrong. "I almost made it." Jack froze. Lisa blinked a few times as if coming to her senses. Her smile faded, and she looked around, startled. "What?" What happened? Jack pulling away from the edge, his heart racing. Sam picked up the camera from the floor, his hands shaking. The broadcast is still live. Everyone saw it. Lisa looked at Jack, pale. I feel someone behind me, pushing me. Jack turned into the thick fog, and his stomach dropped. The bridge didn't just want the dogs, she wanted them, and Lisa had almost been the first. The hotel in Dumbarton seemed even quieter when the group returned that evening. Nobody wanted to talk about what happened on the bridge. Lisa remained silent, her eyes fixed on an invisible point, as if trying to remember something that was just beyond her reach. Jack, on the other hand, couldn't shake the image of Lisa smiling as she almost fell to her death. The bridge called her, and for a moment, she wanted to go. After locking himself in his room, Jack tried to convince himself that it could all have been an accident. Maybe an unconscious impulse. Maybe the wind. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The night progressed slowly. He tossed and turned in bed for hours, unable to sleep, while the hotel's old wood creaked at the slightest movement. The wind outside whispered through the cracks in the window, creating unsettling sounds, almost like words spoken from far away. And then, something changed. The temperature suddenly dropped. The air became heavy, as if being sucked out of the room. Jack opened his eyes, and he saw it. In the dim light, something rises next to his bed, a humanoid figure, too tall, too thin. Its arms were long, and its body seemed to be covered in a dark mist, as if the darkness itself was alive. It had no face, just a contorted shadow leaning over him. Jack tried to move, but his body didn't respond. Paralysis where I am. He's heard about it. But that didn't explain the icy cold crawling over his skin, nor the smell of damp earth and rotting flesh that permeated the room. The thing leaned closer. Jack could hear a sound coming from her, a whispered, scratchy murmur, as if contained words trying to form themselves within a deep well. You already belong to her. Jack tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. One thing didn't move, like a human thing. She fell apart, like black smoke being sucked into the ground, the return to normal. Jack sat up in bed, panting, cold sweat running down his forehead. He turned on the light, eyes sweeping the room. Nothing. For a moment, he wanted to believe it was just a nightmare. But then he felt numb. Something scratched his skin. He took off his shirt collar and saw claw marks on his chest. 3 deep, reddish lines, freshly made. Jack took a deep breath, trying to control his panic. The bridge followed them, and now she was inside the hotel. Dawn brought a bit of a break for Jack. The claw marks on his chest were real. He didn't bypass anyone. I knew that if I said it out loud, it would become more than just a nightmare. But what really bothered him was something else. The whisper. You already belong to her. These words repeat in your head like an evil echo, unable to disappear. Lisa, on the other hand, looked more haggard than ever. Ever since the episode on the bridge, she had been strange. Pale, distracted, as if something was slowly draining his energy. We need to see the footage from yesterday's broadcast, Jack said. The group gathered on the laptop, re-watching the live stream video. The scene of Lisa's attack made him hold his breath. She really got pushed. His shirt even wrinkled at the back, as if invisible fingers were grabbing it. But the worst came later. As Jack advanced the recording, he noticed something beyond the fog deep inside the bridge. Wait a minute, what is that? He paused the video. In the darkness, among the cloudy fog, there were 2 points highlighted. Small, round, like eyes. Oh no, muttered Emily, covering her mouth with her hand. Jack increased the contrast of the image. Now it was impossible to deny it. Someone, or something, was watching the group on the bridge. Lisa started to shake. It can't be. There was no one else there, but the eyes were there, fixed, waiting. That's when Sam spoke up abruptly. We need to go back. Lisa looked at him as if he had lost his mind. To go back? Did you freak out? There's only one way to know what this is. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, but deep down, he knew Sam was right. They get over it first. The group returned to Overtoun Bridge at nightfall. The place felt different. The air was thicker, as if the darkness itself had become a weight on his shoulders. Jack held the camera steady. If those eyes were there again, he would capture them. The mist crept up the bridge's railing like spectral fingers, wrapping around their ankles. The silence was absolute. No sound of birds, no rustling of leaves. Just or nothing. Jack adjusted the camera lens and whispered, "If there's anyone here, show yourself." The wind cut through the bridge like a wail. Lisa shuddered, and then they heard arrangements. Coming from under the bridge, a rhythmic sound, claws, scraping against stone, like something rising. Jack swallowed hard and pointed a cell phone flashlight at the railing. I'm about stopped. Absolute silence. And then, deep in the fog, 2 points opened. The eyes. And now, they were much closer. The eyes in the darkness did not move. They just observed. Jack felt his heart race. His breath caught in his chest as the warming sound began again, but this time multiplied. It wasn't just one. Several pairs of claws scratched the stones of the bridge as if something was climbing up from the depths. Lisa pushes Jack by the arm. Correct. The group quickly retreated down the trail, but Sam stopped. He was looking at the edge of the bridge. "What are you doing?" Emily confused. Sam turned slowly, eyes blank. They never left. Before anyone could react, he ran to the side of the bridge and started down an old stone path hidden by vegetation. "Damn," Jack grumbled, going after him. Lisa and Emily hesitated for a second, but then decided to follow. The trail led to a forgotten part of the structure, hidden beneath the bridge, where everything was different. Denser, heavier, as if something had been buried in that land for centuries. It was Lisa who found it first. "My God, what is this?" She pointed to a crack in the ground, a narrow opening between the rocks, like a passage into something dense. An icy wind blew from there, carrying the smell of damp earth and rot. Jack shone a flashlight inside, and I saw the symbols. They climbed down carefully using the sides of the rock for support. The tunnel was unnatural. Someone dug it. And what was inside should not be found. The walls were covered with carved sculptures, all revolving around a central figure. A tall, hooded being, holding a dagger over a sacrificed body. All around him, distorted creatures crawled towards him. Emily touched one of the symbols and swallowed. This cult. They sacrificed dogs. Jack bent down and discovered that the floor was covered in small, broken bones. But the worst happened. When Lisa illuminated the deepest corner of the chamber. "Guys, these aren't just dog bones." Jack turned to look, his lungs filled with suffocating air. Human skulls were piled there, some still attached to fragments of ancient clothing. They were items, maybe hundreds. Sam knelt before the stone altar in the center of the room. "They tried to close it," he murmured. But it wasn't enough. Jack moved and noticed a dark crack in the floor, right in the middle of the altar. Something there pulsed, a low, irregular sound like a distant heartbeat. "What the hell is that?" Lisa said, her voice shaking. Emily moved the camera, but before it could focus, the flashlight light flashed violently. A cold impossible filled the air, and then, from the bottom of the crevice, something breathed. Jack felt his blood run cold. Bridget was not just a place of death, it was a door, and now they were found. The air inside the underground chamber felt heavier. The wind blowing from the crack in the altar was not natural. It carried a smell of ancient earth, rot, and something metallic. Iron. Blood. Jack felt cold in his body. They should never have found that place. Sam, still on his knees, ran a trembling hand over the altar, brushing dust off a block of stone. On it, ancient words were engraved in Latin, mixed with ritualistic symbols. Lisa shined the flashlight on the text. "Can you read?" Sam frowned. eyes skimming over the words. His lips moved soundlessly, as if his mind was processing something that he already knew. Then he began to translate. The blood of the dog opens the way. A heavy silence fell over the group. Emily swallowed second. That explains the dogs. They don't jump. They are called, Sam continued, his voice now trembling. But the blood of man keeps the guardian satiated. Jack felt his skin crawl. Guardian. Lisa looked around uneasily. Are you talking about demon dog? Sam nodded slowly. He's not just a legend. He is real. Jack looked at the crack in the altar. The sound that once seemed like a distant climate was now stronger. He tried to ignore the impression that something was getting confused inside. Sam turned over yet another stone, revealing a second block of carved text. His voice is almost lifeless when translating. If the sacrifice ceases, the bridge will carry the chosen ones. The veil will be torn. He will awaken. Lisa staggered back a step. My God, that's why people keep dying there. Jack felt dread tightening his chest. The bridge is alive. She needs sacrifices. Emily writes to Sam. If that's true, how do we stop it? Sam's face was as pale as a corpse. We don't stop. A suffocating silence settles. Lisa clenched her fists. It can't be true. There has to be a way. Sam took a deep breath and gestured toward the crack in the altar. Whatever is here needs souls. If they're not dogs, they're people. The bridge always chooses. Jack closed his eyes for a second, trying to analyze the information. But then, a new ecological sound, or through the tunnel. Claws scratching stone. Emily swung a flashlight quickly toward the chamber's entrance. Nothing, but everyone felt it. They were no longer alone there. Jack looked at Sam and noticed something strange. He no longer looked scared. He looked resigned, as if he already knew how it would all end, as if the bridge had already chosen. The group left the underground chamber in a hurry. Something was there with them, something they could not see, but felt in every fiber of their bodies. The biting wind carried a smell of damp earth and old flesh, and the scratches in the rocks. Behind them, they didn't stop. Jack pushes Lisa by the arm. Correct. They climbed the slippery trail, stumbling over the soft earth, feeling the invisible presence approaching. When I finally reached the top, Lisa gasped and put her hands on her knees. It's following us, she whispered. Jack looked back. The entrance to the underground chamber now looked like just another piece of moss-covered stone, as if it had never existed, but something had come out of there with them. Lisa was shaking. His skin looked even paler than before, and there was sweat dripping from his forehead. His eyes were strange, lost, blurred, as if they saw something beyond reality. Lisa? Emily called, but her friend did not respond. Instead, she turned and started walking. Direction, the edge of the bridge. Lisa! Jack ran to her, but something prevented him from moving. It was as if the very air around her had become denser, heavier, pushing him back. Smooth, continuous walking, each step slow and calculated. His body was rigid, as if was no longer hers. She is in a trance, Emily said, trying to understand. More Jack saw first of all, the slight smile on Lisa's lips. She wanted to go. Lisa stopped at the edge of the bridge. Mist rose around him, thick and murky, hiding everything below. She turned her head slightly back and whispered a single sentence. I finally see her. And then, she jumped. Emily spoke. Jack ran to the edge, but Lisa wasn't there. Darkness covered everything below the bridge, hiding the jagged rocks and the river that should have been below. They didn't hear the impact. No sound of body hitting the water. No, Emily murmured, eyes wide. Jack took out his flashlight and pointed it into a dense fog. Nothing. No sign of Lisa, no clothes, no movement in the water. She was simply gone. That doesn't make sense, Jack muttered, feeling a chill run down his spine. Sam, who until then hadn't said anything, I looked into the void, eyes shining in the pale moonlight. When he finally spoke, his voice, was low and emotionless. The bridge doesn't kill everyone, some she takes. Jack felt the world spin. Lisa hadn't just fallen. She was taken. The ride back to the hotel was a blur. Nobody spoke. There were no more words that could explain what happened. Lisa didn't just jump, she had disappeared. Jack tried to rationalize. Perhaps the discovery hid the body. Maybe she was alive, clinging to some rock below the bridge, waiting for help. But then he remembered the smile. Lisa, I wanted to jump. Or rather, someone made her want it. The idea made his chest tighten. They were fighting something they couldn't see, something that understood their minds better than they understood themselves. He thinks a lot. I needed to sleep. But the bridge, I wouldn't let him rest. Jack woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. He blinked a few times, trying to adjust his eyes to the darkness. The hotel was plunged into silence, except for the creaking of wood in the hallway. Someone was walking outside your room. He sat up slowly, feeling his heart beating against his ribs. Emily? Sam? Jack took a deep breath and slid off the bed, heading to the door. He turned the handle carefully and opened it a crack, peering into the dimly lit hallway. His body froze. Lisa was there, with her back turned, standing in the middle of the hallway, her head tilted to the side. Her hair was wet, dripping onto the old carpet. Jack swallowed hard. Lisa? She moved. Slow, impossibly slow, like a distorted reflection in a broken mirror. His head spun first, and then his body hit, an unnatural and wrong movement. And then she smiled, the same smile as before jumping. Jack felt his legs go wobbly. This couldn't be happening. Lisa was dead, or missing, or, before you can react, the cell phone was not created. The loud, regretful sound made his chest tighten. He didn't want to answer, but somehow I knew I needed it. Without taking his eyes off Lisa, he took a hesitant step back and picked up the phone with shaking hands. The screen was off, but the call is still ringing. Jack attended. At the same instant, Lisa's voice filled the room. "Jack, you dropped me." The line went dead. He trembled, sweat drips from his forehead. This wasn't real. When I pronounced the look again, the hallway was empty. Lisa was gone. But the smell of still water and damp earth, it was still there. And Jack saw a worse part. The call was still active. And on the other end of the line, something he was breathing. The sun had barely risen when Jack knocked on Emily's bedroom door. He didn't sleep. After what happened the night before, Lisa in the hallway, the impossible connection, the smell of stagnant water, he knew he needed to get out of that hotel. Emily opened the door, her eyes sunken and red. She didn't sleep either. Sam is gone. Jack felt his heart stop for a second. What? Emily opened the door completely. Sam's room was empty. The bed was unmade, as if he had been picked up in the middle of the night. The strange thing was, the nightstand next to the mattress. On it, a single object rested. An old book bound in black leather. Emily took it carefully and opened it. I found him here when I woke up. The name inside is of a certain Alistair McGregor. Jack frowned. Who the hell is this? Emily flipped back a few pages. From what I understand, he died in Overtoun Manor before it was abandoned. I think he knew what he was celebrating with. This bridge. Jack sat down next to her and began to read. The pages were aged, the writing from the pressure of a trembling hand. This man was scared when he wrote that. I was warned never to buy this property, but I believed it was just local superstition. Now I know it was a mistake. Since I moved, I've seen things I can't explain. The wind blows for no reason. Dogs bark into the darkness, people avoid the bridge. Now I understand why. Every generation must pay its price. The bridge demands human blood. If there are no sacrifices, he will receive the call for souls, choosing them without mercy. Jack felt his stomach tighten. This is a ritual. Emily turned the page, her hands shaking. Lady Overtoun knew. She accepted the pact. She let the bridge take the chosen, but what if in each generation someone decided to resist? What would happen if the cycle was broken? The next words were scribbled more heavily, as if McGregor was writing hastily, out of time. He is waking up. I feel it calling. There is no more time. There is no more time. The last sentence was smudged, blurred by what could have been tears or blood. The bridge never forgets, it always takes its due. Emily closed the diary with a snap. Jack ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the truth crashing down on him. It's not just dogs. It's not just random suicides. This is a pact. Emily looked at him, terror written all over her face. What if Sam is next? Jack felt a deep shiver crawl up his spine, because deep down he already knew the answer. The bridge had already been chosen, and maybe it was too late to save him. The wind whistled against the hotel windows as Jack and Emily hurried out of the room, McGregor's diary still clutched in her hands. Sam was missing. More Jack. I already knew where he was. Wasting no time, they ran to the car and headed towards the bridge. The road seemed darker, narrower, as if the surrounding landscape had closed in on them. The engine roared against the silence of the night, and the fog danced over the asphalt like a living thing. Emily was pale, her gaze fixed on the road. He knew something that didn't get around us, she murmured. Sam. He was accepting of it. Jack opened the steering wheel, his fingers white with tension. No, the bridge pushes him. When he arrived, a vision stole the air from his lungs. Sam's camera was there, alone, on the bridge railing. The tripod was still set up, pointed. Into the void, recorded. A small red light blinked, indicating that the camera had been in recording mode for a while. Hours. Jack got out of the car first, the wind cutting into his skin. Emily made a hesitant movement, her eyes fixed on the camera, as if he was afraid to touch her. What if he's still here? His voice was low, fragile. Jack didn't respond. He opened his lips and pressed the button to play the video. The screen flickered, static for a few seconds. Then an image appeared. Sam Estava Ali, alone, standing on the bridge. His expression was calm, resigned. The wind was blowing hard, ruffling his hair. Jack and Emily held their breath. Sam addressed the camera directly and smiled. I understand now. His voice was serene, low, as if he were speaking to someone invisible. You can't fight it. You accept. Jack felt a shiver run up his spine. The camera shook a little as Sam stepped forward, approaching the parapet. Emily squinted. No, Sam. Please don't. In the video, Sam stopped, took a deep breath and closed his eyes. The silence was absolute. Only wind and fog filled the void. Then he leaned forward and jumped. Emily covered her mouth with her hands, choking back a sob. Jack felt his throat close, but the video, it's not over. The camera continues recording, pointed at the fog below the bridge. The mist moved, as if something was confused about it, something big. And then the whisper came, low, dragged, carried by the wind, but bright enough to make every hair on Jack's body tingle. Now it's your turn. The screen went dark. Emily blurted out a solution, her body shaking. Jack just stood there, feeling the weight of what he had just seen. The bridge I had Sam now, and from what the voice said, she wanted more. Jack didn't know how long he stood in front of Sam's camera. The phrase still echoed inside his head, cold and implacable. Now it's your turn. Emily was kneeling on the floor, her hands trembling, her face pale and lifeless. The shock of seeing Sam faded in that way that had sapped whatever resistance she had left. But Jack still had something. Flooring, and the survival instinct screamed inside him. He grabbed Emily by the shoulders, forcing her to face him. We need to get out of here. Now. Emily blinked a few times as if coming back to the present. His gaze was empty, broken. But then, she agreed. They ran to the car without looking back. Jack started the engine with shaking hands, the sound of the engine roaring through the oppressive silence. He stepped on the accelerator, and the vehicle sped off down the road, headlights cutting through the darkness. We'll notify the police, Emily said, her voice tense. We tell everything. Jack didn't respond. He knew no one would believe them. But it didn't matter. They just started leaving Dumbarton, but the city, I didn't want to let them go. The winding road leading out of town seemed longer. The gnarled trees rushed past the windows, shadows stretched in the gloom. The sky was therefore no stars, no moon. Jack was gripping the steering wheel tightly. He knew that path. But something was wrong. Shouldn't we have reached the exit by now? Emily asked, looking through the glass. Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He looked at the GPS. The screen was turned off. No battery. No, Jack muttered. He pressed the accelerator harder. The car increased speed. The road continued. Emily began to breathe rapidly. Jack, we've been to this place before. Jack felt an adrenaline rush through his body. He looked to the side of the road, trying to take some landmark. A fence, a sign, anything. But then his blood ran cold. On the side of the road, in the fog, there was a broken pole. The same post as what they had been through 10 minutes ago. No, no, no! He pressed the accelerator even harder. The car flew across the road. But when the fog grew even thicker, Jack saw something ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the track. He turned the steering wheel violently. The car skidded off the road and hit a tree with a thud. The glass shattered. Emily spoke. The world spun before falling into silence. Jack blinked several times, his head throbbing. He felt something warm running down his forehead. He looked to the side. Emily was still breathing hard, but alive. But then, he looked out the windshield. The figure, it was still there, stopping in the middle of the road, and Jack found out immediately. Lisa wet, pale, eyes empty, and a broken smile on her lips. Emily woke up, still dazed, and shook Jack's gaze. When he saw it, a scream choked in his throat. Lisa asked for a hand and told them. And then, the mist swallowed everything. Jack felt his chest tighten. They couldn't leave. The bridge, I wouldn't let them go. The world was just cloudy. Jack blinked a few times, trying to focus his vision. His head throbbed. The car was stopped, crushed against the tree. Shattered glass scattered across the ground. The air smelled metallic of rust and wet earth. Emily was still in the passenger seat, breathing hard, her eyes wide. "Lisa," she whispered. Jack followed her gaze. The road was empty. Lisa had disappeared, but the fog remains. And with it, something more. Jack felt it before he heard it. A presence, an invisible weight pressing down on your chest, squeezing your lungs. And then came the suggestions. Lows, dragged away, multiple voices speaking at the same time. Some crying, others laughing, some family members, and then one of them whispered your name. Jack. He froze. His entire body shivered. Emily right to him. What it was? Jack didn't respond, because now he listened. Voices came from all sides. Familiar voices. Sam, Lisa, children's voices. Voices he didn't recognize, but begging for help. And in their midst, a new voice. Lower, softer. It's more dangerous. End it, Jack. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to block out the sound. But when they opened them again, he was no longer. In the car, Jack was on bridge, but not the bridge as he remembered it. The sky was black as coal. Mist swirled around the parapet, but below it, there were no rocks, no river, nothing. Just an endless abyss. And in the middle of the bridge, someone was waiting. Lisa. She sent it to him, as if it had never disappeared. His face was pale. His hair was limp and wet. Jack, everything's okay now. He looked around, his heart hammering. This wasn't real. But I felt the cold wind on my skin, the smell of damp stone, the invisible weight on your shoulders. Lisa took a step forward. You can put an end to this. Just come to me. Jack felt something inside him break. An indescribable weight took over his body. Tiredness, as if all that terror, all that fighting was useless. Maybe Lisa is right. Perhaps the only way to end this was acceptable. He took a step forward. The voices around you, they stopped. Black seems to hold the air, trapping the world in an instant, frozen in time. Jack took another step. Lisa opened her arms. Just one more. And it all ends. He felt the cold ground beneath his feet, the wind whistling in his ears. One step. Just one more. Jack! Emily's voice takes him back like an electric shock. Jack blinked. He was back in the car. Emily was holding him by the shoulders, her eyes wide. "You were walking," she said. "You were getting out of the car." Jack was breathing heavily. The voices were gone, but he knew the truth. The bridge was still calling to him, and more, he wanted to respond. The dawn stretches like an endless nightmare. The car was still in the same place, crushed against the tree, surrounded by a darkness that seemed more dense than before. The fog did not dissipate. The whole world looked at the piece of road. Human city, bridge, yo. Jack, I knew what I needed to do. Emily held his arm tightly, her eyes red and wide. "No, you won't do that." Jack barely heard her. The voice still whispered inside his head. "Just one more step, Jack, and it's all over." Looked at Emily, his chest feeling tight. He couldn't drag her into this. "I need to go," he murmured. Emily grabbed her shoulders, desperate. "No, that's exactly what this thing wants. Do you really think that surrendering will change anything?" Jack looked away. "If this continues, the bridge will catch someone else, you." Emily shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. "We find another way. I won't let you do that." But Jack had already decided. He trusted her. "Okay," he said softly, placing his hands over hers. "Let's go, okay? Let's try to go out again." Emily watched him for a moment, still suspicious. But for a second, she believed him. And that second was enough. "Jack, quick." He pushed Emily back with a sudden movement and ripped the car key from the dashboard. Before she could react, he was already running. "Jack!" He didn't look back. His feet tapped against the asphalt, his breathing ragged. He felt that if he stopped, would change my mind. The bridge needs him. The fog grew thicker as he approached. The ancient stone of the bridge loomed before him like a funerary monolith. The wind whistled through the cracks, and Jack, he realized, he was being expected. That was where it would all end. He stopped in the middle of the bridge, his heart pounding. There was no fear, just released. He placed one foot on the railing, and then one last voice called out to him. "Jack!" He froze. Lisa was there, not at the bottom of the bridge. There, in the fog, in front of you. Your wet hair, your bottomless eyes, that same broken smile. Jack felt the ground disappear beneath him. He made the wrong choice, and now, perhaps it was too late to turn back. The wind cut through the bridge like invisible blades, dragging with it suggestions of the past. Jack felt the cold go through his bones as he stood on the railing, looking out at the endless abyss below. The dense fog swirled below, viva, as if waiting to swallow him. Lisa watched him from the other end of the bridge. His body was a pale shadow in the mist, his eyes two empty caves. "It's okay now, Jack. You know what you have to do." Jack felt a tight lump in his throat. "If I do this, is it all over?" Lisa tilted her head, her smile widening in a wrong. Of course, but something inside him hesitated. He remembered Sam. From McGregor's diary, from the phrase that is repeated between stories, between centuries, between deaths. Bridge never forgets. She always takes her due. Jack felt his stomach drop. She doesn't just want a sacrifice, she wants a cycle. If he jumped, what would happen to Emily? Horror crept up his spine. The bridge doesn't want to stop. She never wanted to. It was not a solution. It was just one more. The suggestion came cold against the back of his neck. Too late. Jack felt an invisible force pressing down on his back. A weight cold, sticky, like hands reaching out of the fog and pulling him forward. He tried to resist. But then the final voice came. Not from Lisa. Not from Sam. Not something human. It was a deep, ancient sound. Famous. And he said just one thing: "You always belong to me." The strength increased. Jack lost his balance. He was falling. Emily woke up to the pale hospital light flickering above her. The smell of disinfectant and clean sheets contrasted with the sticky feeling of fear that still clung to his skin. What happened? The last thing he remembered was Jack running towards the bridge, his silhouette swallowed by the fog. She tried to follow him, tried to stop him, and then darkness. A nurse noticed that she had awakened and emailed to call the doctor. A few minutes later, a man in a lab coat entered the room holding a clipboard. "You were lucky," he said, offering a hollow smile. But there was nothing lucky there. He was found passed out near the road. A farmer fell and called the ambulance. Emily blinked, confused. "And my friend?" The doctor frowned. "There was no one with you." The words fell on her like a crushing weight. "No, that's not right." His voice broke. Jack was there, but deep down you knew. He wasn't there anymore. He inhabited the bridge now. After being discharged, Emily decided that I should leave Dumbarton. I would never go back to that place again. She rented a car and possibly stopped, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. The city's aging houses were soon left behind, and the winding road opened up before her. But then, the engine choked. The car shuddered and died abruptly. Emily frowned, turning the key in the ignition again. Nothing. Little by little, his body began to shake. Why, she saw where she was. The road before her ended na Ponte Overtoun. I had never taken this path. It never turned in that direction. And yet, the bridge brought her back. The silence was absolute. The cold wind crawled across his skin like invisible fingers. And then she saw him. Jack, standing on the railing of the bridge. His face was calm, serene. He was wearing the same clothes as the last time you saw him, but there was something wrong. In it, your smile, a smile cold, impossible. Emily felt her chest tighten. Jack. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes fixed on her, and then turned and walked into the fog. Emily worked. She ran out of the car, stumbling onto the road, her eyes wide with terror. But when he reached the railing, he looked down, and there was nothing, just tranquility, just emptiness. Emily fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Jack was lost, and now the bridge knew where to find it. Because the bridge never forget. It never stops, and sooner or later, she always calls back those she touched.